Welcome back to Combat Mission Fortress Italy, where we're going to tackle the foiling Fustian campaign from the Gustav Line module. Operation Fustian was a British operation mounted during the invasion of Sicily. In the initial landings, the British 8th Army had come ashore in the southeast of the island and secured the port city of Syracuse. With that foothold established, 13th Corps was to punch north along the coastal highway towards Catania to keep the pressure up on the German and Italian defenders and deny them the time and space to set up a coherent defence. A key obstacle to a rapid advance was the Samita River, about 10 kilometres south of Catania. The coastal road crossed this via a single bridge, known as Primosole Bridge, which made for a natural choke point the Axis forces could use to delay 13th Corps. So the British planned Operation Fustian. The 1st Parachute Brigade would drop to the north and south of the bridge, seize it, and then hold until 13th Corps could arrive to exploit. We're not playing as the British Airborne in this campaign though, we're going to be playing as German Airborne. The Germans also grasped the importance of Primosole Bridge, and with it being defended by poor quality elements of the Italian 213th Coastal Division, dispatched the German 1st Parachute Division to reinforce them. The ability of airborne troops to rapidly deploy into friendly territory is perhaps not as dynamic and exciting as dropping behind enemy lines, but it is a lot safer. On July 13th, Fallschirmjaeger Battalion 1 landed at Catania, and despite losing some assets in an Allied air raid, quickly made its way down to the bridge. At the same time, the British Paras were preparing for their drop, taking off from North Africa in 105 C-47 Skytrains, followed by 19 aircraft towing gliders that carried the brigade's anti-tank guns and jeeps. This was the largest British airborne operation of the war so far, and it caught its share of the perils of early airborne ops. Despite efforts to avoid friendly fire, one batch of 33 aircraft strayed from the safe flight path and flew over Allied naval vessels, which proceeded to open fire on them. 4 aircraft were lost, and 9 more forced to abort due to damage. The rest of the airlift encountered German and Italian anti-aircraft fire once they turned inland. Even though another 10 aircraft were shot down and 11 forced to turn back, the main effect of the AA fire was to provoke such violent evasive action from the pilots as to thoroughly disrupt the drop. Only a fraction of the paras that jumped found themselves anywhere near the correct drop zones. Others found themselves scattered across the coastal plain or even up on the slopes of Mount Etna. More were unable to make the jump at all and found themselves on the return trip back to North Africa. Those that dropped on the LZ south of the bridge dropped in front of the newly dug positions occupied by Fallschirmjaeger MG Battalion 1 that had arrived earlier during the day. After a brief spell where the Fallschirmjaeger thought the drifting parachutists were friendly forces dropping in as reinforcements, they opened fire. And that's where our first scenario kicks off. We're commanding the MG Battalion's 2nd Company under Hauptmann Lorn. This has set up on the edge of some orchards on a gentle forward slope, looking out over some wheat fields to the west. There's an irrigation canal at the base of the slope. The orchards are broken up by some paths and lanes, and there's a barn and 2 farmhouses right in the centre. The enemy are primarily going to be approaching from their drop zone to the west, across the fields. But in the chaos of the drop, we're also going to have to deal with a little groups of paratroopers problem. That is to say, small groups of angry, heavily armed paras who could be anywhere. As you might expect for part of a machine gun battalion, 2nd Company is very MG heavy. Overall we have 8 heavy machine gun teams at our disposal, broken down into 2 platoons of 4, plus the company HQ, 4 3-man scout teams armed with 2 SMGs and a rifle each, a single 37mm anti-tank gun, and the company's heavy mortar platoon HQ. The mortars themselves are unavailable for this mission. It's just too dark and the forces are too intermingled to safely start chucking mortar bombs about. We do have some Italian infantry as well though. We're starting off with an anti-parachutist platoon at the farm. Another one will arrive from the north in about 5 minutes. These platoons are made up of 2 12-man squads armed with rifles. They're poorly trained, totally unmotivated and badly led, so I'm not expecting a lot. The German Fallschirmjaeger, on the other hand, are much better trained and highly experienced. The enemy is also a high-quality force, and although they're only going to be bringing light infantry to the fight, British Airborne squads do carry a preponderance of SMGs, so they have the potential to really put the lead out if they get close. That might not be a problem when they're trying to cross these wheat fields. It's definitely going to be an issue inside the orchards when visibility is down to knife fighting ranges. There are 3 ground objectives for this mission. I need to hold my company HQ position for 150 victory points. That's to my front left with about half my starting Fallschirmjäger. I also need to hold on to the farm. That's worth another 100 points, and it's where the 2nd and 3rd platoon HQs, a HMG section and the starting anti-parachutist platoon begin. Then there's a crossroads I need to take and hold in my rear, off to the east. That's not occupied at all, so if I want to grab the 100 victory points on offer for that, I'll have to risk advancing through this terrain in the dark. Finally, there's another 150 points available for destroying British paras lurking in the orchards. There's only 30 minutes on the clock, so putting all the details together, I think the best option is going to be to sit tight, at least to begin with. I'm already in position to hold 2 of the 3 ground objectives, and I can dominate the western approach through the wheat field. Moving around not only sacrifices those advantages, but embraces the risk of blundering into nasty little SMG teams in the orchards. I'd much rather the paras blunder into my forces in the dark. I've got a lot less firepower and close range engagement, so I think it's going to be critically important to get the first hits in. To that end, I've made a few minor adjustments to the default setup. I'm basically trying to keep all the HMGs covering west, while the scouts and Italians provide security against any Brits approaching through the trees. Primarily, that's meant leaving my left as it is, and concentrating my right into the farm, setting the MGs up in the buildings and protecting them with the HQ teams and scouts, while the Italians cover off the right flank. When the battle starts, nothing happens. This always comes with the same question marks at night. Is there nobody out there, or can I just not see them? Either way, a lack of activity doesn't mean I'm going to get up and find the enemy on their terms. I'm sat on 2 of my 3 objectives. They can come to me. I'm certainly not inclined to move until I've assessed the threat posed by the British force I'm expecting to come across the wheat fields, and in the meantime, the clock's on my side. The paras show themselves about 3 minutes in when they start advancing across the field. The first contacts get spotted running across the dirt track running through the wheat, and they're quickly cut down by the MG42s and high explosive shells from the 37mm gun. There are more Brits out there though, advancing in small teams across the whole width of the field, occasionally stopping to return fire. They do score some hits on my Fallschirmjäger, but ultimately they're putting a handful of individual Bren guns up against 8 HMGs, and that's really no contest. The Brits push forward to the canal. They're taking casualties all the time, but only in 1s or 2s because they're moving in well-dispersed small teams. It's dark and they're hard to spot when they stop and go to ground in the wheat. The field is only about 250 metres across as well, so it doesn't take them long to cross and gain a brief reprieve as they scramble into the dead ground of the canal. They're very lucky the Fallschirmjägers haven't had longer to knit their defence together. Dead ground like that is a prime preset target for mortars. At about the same time, we get our first signs of activity in the orchards. On the right, a small team emerges into the open ground around the farm. The first para over the orchard wall is shot by one of the Italian riflemen, then 2 more are pinned and finished off by 2nd Platoon HQ and one of the HMG teams. On the left, the scouts covering the rear of the company HQ start hearing more enemy approaching beneath the trees. They're ready and waiting for them when they pop up at point blank range. Soon, the paras who have made it across the wheat field have crossed the canal and start trying to fight their way up the slope towards the farm. The MGs in the buildings ruthlessly mow them down. The natural approach here is via a finger of woodland that extends down towards the canal on the right. The original deployment had 2 of the HMG teams set up here, but I moved them because they felt too exposed to potential roaming Brits coming up behind them in the orchards. Instead, it's where the Italian anti-parachutist platoon ended up. The first para team to try and push that approach runs right into the short gap in the trees immediately in front of them and gets shot down. The Italians throw a few grenades downhill for good measure, proving themselves a lot more capable than their soft factors would imply. All of these little flashpoints take place over the course of about 5 minutes. By turn 8, everything has gone quiet. The paras make one more attempt to probe towards the Italians by the farm and manage to wipe out the anti-parachutist platoon HQ, but again, the massive rifleman puts fire down across the clearing and pelts them with grenades until they're wiped out. With that, the British attack from the west seems to have been stopped in its tracks. That puts the boot squarely on my foot. With a solid 20 minutes still on the clock, I should really focus away from the wheat field and start working on my other objectives of clearing the British paras from the orchards and securing the crossroads. The problem is that I don't really want to. I've just got a pretty good demonstration of what's going to happen if my troops bump into some waiting paras, and I'm not keen on getting bushwhacked. This gets reinforced by the experience of my reinforcements, the 2nd Italian anti-parachutist platoon. They've entered the battlefield from the north, on my right, and when cautiously advancing them through the orchards towards the farm to see if that flank is clear, one of the squads gets bumped by some angry Brits. Caught by a pair of Stens, they lose 3 men in the opening burst, then panic and run back the way they came. It's a couple of minutes until that squad is under control again. So, not encouraging. And again, I'm in a good position where I am. I'm holding 2 of the 3 ground objectives, and the enemy in the orchards have already suffered some casualties. It's not like I'm not on top of my objectives. In fact, going back after the battle and cease firing at this point, I actually net a major victory. But at the same time, we're not even halfway through yet, so I decide to at least try and contest the crossroads. The closest element is, of course, the anti-parachutist patrol. We could pretend that these are the best men for the job of wandering through the orchards at night because they're local and they know the ground, but let's not kid ourselves here. They're so poorly trained, motivated and led that they're not going to be much good in any subsequent battles. The German element of my force is, and with no replacements in this campaign, losses will stack up. So the anti-parachutists get to go and scout the crossroads because they're straight up expendable. And it's their job. It's in the name. Crossing back over the road they arrived on and plunging into the trees on the eastern map edge, they move carefully towards the objective. The lead squad gets as close as 20 meters before a Bren gun opens up on them. The lead man goes down and the squad hits the dirt, only to find themselves sharing it with a British hand grenade that takes out 2 more when it goes off. They panic and run back through the woods. Holding off for a few minutes until the panicking squad calms down, I start to crawl the whole platoon forward to positions where they can area fire the offending corner of the objective. I still have plenty of rifles and clearly the enemy is in grenade range. This may have driven off the Bren team ahead, but all the muzzle flashes attract more enemy fire from the other side of the crossroads. The Italians take more casualties and start panicking again. Obviously there are more Brits about than I had thought, and I should really pull my finger out and go after them. The anti-parachutist patrol can stay where it is to act as what we might politely call a fixing element, while I bring up the 2 Fallschirmjaeger scout teams and one of the HMGs from the farm to hit the paras in the flank. I'm just about setting this up when the AI surrenders. That makes it a total victory, though like I've already pointed out, this mission was pretty much in the bag before half time. The British Airborne have lost a total of 62 dead and wounded, mostly out in the wheat field, though there are still some scattered elements in the orchards and they do technically still hold the crossroads. I'm firmly in control of the farm and the company HQ objectives, with only 15 men lost overall, 9 of whom were from that one unlucky Italian patrol. Overall, I have to say that this mission panned out pretty much exactly as anticipated. There weren't any surprises here. My initial plan to keep the movement down to a minimum paid off, and my concerns about operating in woods at night against an enemy with a profusion of automatic weapons seems well founded. Here though, the British Airborne were unlucky enough to find themselves dropping directly in front of a machine gun battalion. Elsewhere, angry little groups of Red Devils are concentrating, reorganising and moving out to hit their objectives. One of these groups will seize Primosole Bridge, and joined by more as the night goes on, set up to defend it. In the next mission, in the morning, we're going to have to mount a counterattack. Hope you all found this one enjoyable and interesting. It looks like this campaign is going to have a much stronger Italian element than I was expecting, which I'm actually looking forwards to. If you'd like to see these videos early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.